Okay, to study value, one of the exercises we can do is create a series of kind of bars, I'm calling them, bars of value to study transitions from, say, light to dark with different media using charcoal and graphite. I'm going to start at the top one. I'm going to use a smudge technique using just some compressed charcoal sticks. And with dry media, I'm going to go from light into something darker. With dry media, you can lay it down, and just by the pressure you put on it, you can get a change in value. So just by adding a little bit of pressure into the darker areas and lighter touch into the lighter areas, we already start to get a change in value. Different things we can use for smudge. We can use a paper towel. We can use our finger. You can use a Q-tip. And they also have these things called blending stumps. It's just kind of a rolled cardboard tube of paper. More subtle changes in value. You can always go back in to an area, beef it up to get a more dramatic change. Try this. And then blend it. So that's using a smudge. Like we just talked about, though, you can take with charcoal, and just by pressing a little bit harder, you can get a change in value with no blending at all. So you have smudge with charcoal, and you've got a no smudge with charcoal, and you can still get changes in value from light to dark just by pressing a little bit harder. And that works with graphite also. Subtractive value, we're going to do a whole kind of section on subtractive value, but just to talk about it real quick, this is when you're going to put on all the value, say with charcoal first. I like to rub it in with a tissue, and now I'll take an eraser like this and I'll pull it out. And a lot of your drawings will involve all of these. You'll be doing some additive, some subtractive, texture. So now we pull out in the areas where we want it a little bit lighter. We pull some of the media out. And then where we want it darker, we might add in, create a little bit more of a transition in that lighter area. So that's what we mean by subtractive. So let's get into some texture. Invented texture. I'm going to use graphite on this. I'm going to chisel my point. When we use a 45-degree hatch, what I mean is that it's going at approximately 45 degrees. They're individual lines, and I want to try and keep them as consistent as possible. I don't want them curving or anything like that. I want them consistent. And you'll also notice, I'll come down here just a little bit further, and I put down the first layer, and it's just one line after another. But you'll notice the shape I drew to texture within, I purposely overlap that edge a little bit. Alright? That's my first layer down. I overlap the edge of that shape I'm rendering into, because I want that line to start to go away. And as you overlap the edge of that shape, the outline starts to kind of fade away. So if you have a real light outline for a guide to what to put your texture up against, it should start to go away. And the same thing, I'm using graphite here. I can push a little bit harder into the darker areas and I get a change in value, but I also want to rely on a buildup of more and more line to create that darkness also. With graphite though, you can only get so dark, and I'm working with just a, let's see, it's like a 4B here. So you can only get so dark. You'd have to go into like a 6B, like this one right here, and we can build yet even more darkness on top of that 4B. But graphite eventually will start to sort of get a shimmer to it, and it can only get so dark at some point. You can get into the 8Bs and 9B graphite, and you will get some good darkness though. As consistent as possible. And this is my go-to right here. This is when I'm doing any quick sketches or anything like that. We're going to do some objects in a little bit. My go-to is this graphite, or this 45-degree hatch. Let's go to some ink now, and I'm going to do a cross hatch. Same thing. I want to stay as consistent as possible. Let's see if I can get this to go here. Here we go. And I'll put down the first layer all in one direction, just using that 45-degree hatch. I'll start to build into it here at about the halfway point, building more line into it, then a little bit more at the 3/4 point, and you just keep building it up, keeping it as consistent as possible, overlapping the edges of the shape you're rendering into. And then we're going to do a crosshatch. Crosshatch, we turn the pin over here, and we're going in the opposite direction. And the lighter areas, it's going to be further apart. In our darker areas, it's going to be more dense. And we just try to stay as confident and consistent as possible. Slowly building up. And this is a crosshatch. Some people take the crosshatch, they'll go 45 one direction, 45 the other direction, and then they'll go like Robert Crumb does. He goes in a vertical direction then. As you get in the lighter areas, it spreads out a little bit. And I'm working pretty quick here, but when you want it a little more precise, you can slow your line down doing that hit go hit. So that's a crosshatch. Next one, going from light to dark, is what I call a scribble texture. This is something to play with. When I scribble, I'm kind of this sort of form initially. I just kind of work across the shape. I'm letting the scribble go outside the edges of the area that I'm trying to put the texture rendered into. So that's my first layer, and I'm going to get darker as I come to this side. And I don't do this. I try to almost stay 90 degrees to the last little scribble to keep it a little less predictable. Just slowly let it build up. The build up of more and more line creates that darkness. Alright, that's a scribble. For the masochists out there, there's a stipple. When I stipple, I'm stippling here with ink. And you just got to make sure you stay over the tip of the pen so that your stipple doesn't have these tails. I'm not a big stipple with tails kind of person. So I try to stay over the top of it so it stays just a dot. Back in the old drafting days, they would come down, because to denote concrete on a detail or something like that, you would go down and quarter turn, down, quarter turn, down, quarter turn, down, quarter turn. I'm not that maniacal about it, so I just try to stay over the top of the stipple so it remains a dot, and it doesn't have something like with a tail on it. And this is going to make every one of your drawing buddies and friends insane, because you're going to make all this racket of this banging noise for hours on end as you slowly build up the darkness into your darker value areas using this maniacal, masochistic, stipple. And I'm not going to wait till it gets super dark, but I think you get the idea that you've just got to spend a lot of time with the stipple. Stay over the top of it so you only get a dot. I'm going to go back to some graphite. This is a horizontal and a vertical hatch. So you're coming across what kind of drawing you're doing, what texture will make sense if you want to change up your textures. Again, my go-to is always the 45-degree hatch when I just want to quickly lay in some value onto a surface. So we go vertical, and then we can come in here and lay some horizontal. Down here we're going to space them out a little bit more. Here they're more dense. We're getting in between the lines. I think you get the idea. I also have what's called a a varied stroke. I'll go back to ink so you can see it. Now usually when we go hit, it's, emphasize the beginning and the end of the line, because I don't want it wisping off like this. But with a varied stroke, I allow that wisp. This might be like a grass texture or something if you're doing an outdoor sketch. And you vary the angle. It goes from 45 to 60 degree, back to 30, down to 45. And this is another one. And if you stay confident with it, and again, it's just a buildup of that stroke. But now we're letting it wisp. It's starting kind of thick and then letting it trail off a little bit thinner, varying the angle. And as you build it up, kind of do almost a crosshatch. Go at a different angle to the first layer that is down, and overlap the edges. You'll be asked to do a similar exercise so you can practice all types of different textures and techniques to create value using Smudge, using some Subtractive, and then playing with a lot of different invented textures to kind of see what it is you enjoy doing, what makes sense for your drawings.